Imagine handing a controller to a kid who has never, played a video game before. They just like mash the buttons randomly and somehow beat the final boss.
Right, yeah. Pure luck.
That is essentially what happened to legendary investor Ray Dalio when he was 12 years old.
Yeah, he bought a stock purely because it was trading for uh, less than $5 a share.
Hmm.
I mean, terrible investment strategy, but the company got acquired and the stock tripled.
Which is just crazy.
And that accidental win basically changed his entire trajectory,
Yeah.
right? It got him hooked.
Exactly. It got him hooked, but it also drove him to spend the rest of his life figuring out the actual source code of the global economy. So, welcome to this custom deep dive for you, the listener. We are unpacking that very source code based on a massive new interview with Dalio. Our mission today decodes his vital distinction between wealth and money and examine the five macro forces shaping the next decade.
So the core of Dalio's framework, it really starts with separating wealth from money,
Yeah.
which, we tend to treat as synonyms.
Right. We just use them interchangeably.
Exactly. But wealth is really just a perceived valuation. It's marking your house up by 20% because the real estate market happens to be hot. Money, on the other hand, is the actual medium that settles the transaction.
Wait, I have to push back a little bit there because in modern finance, that line gets incredibly blurry. If I have $1 million in liquid equities, I can just borrow against that portfolio today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for all intents and purposes, it functions like money in terms of my purchasing power.
It functions like money until, well, until everyone tries to execute that exact same strategy at once. And the sources highlight this really staggering metric. The current U.S. wealth-to-money ratio is roughly 8.5 to 1.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there is drastically more perceived paper wealth than actual liquidity in the system. And that ratio perfectly matches the historic bubble peaks of 1929 and 2000.
Because if a panic hits and people rush to convert that perceived paper wealth into cash, the liquidity instantly dries up.
Exactly. The bubble pops because the actual money to settle those trades simply isn't there.
Right.
And the cash itself has a fundamental flaw. Dalio really emphasizes that fiat currency is basically just a debt instrument. It's an IOU from a government.
Right. When you hold currency in a bank, you're holding a liability on someone else's balance sheet.
Precisely. Which explains his argument for holding like 5 to 15% of a portfolio in gold. Gold isn't a liability.
Because no one has to fulfill a promise for an ounce of gold to have value.
Right. And he notes Bitcoin doesn't quite fill this role yet because governments can still track the nodes and potentially, interfere with the network.
So that vulnerability of fiat currency, the fact that it's fundamentally just debt, that's actually the perfect bridge to Dalio's macro framework. He identifies five major global forces, almost like tectonic plates.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. The first force is the debt cycle. We are currently at a stage where governments are printing money just to service their massive debts.
Which creates inflation.
Yes, which lowers the standard of living, and that brings us to the second force, internal political populism.
So people feel the economic squeeze, politics polarize, and the wealth gap triggers internal conflict.
Then you add force 3, shifting geopolitical power. A country distracted by internal conflict becomes vulnerable. Rising powers step up to challenge the established ones, which disrupts global trade.
And the last two.
The fourth is the cost of nature, so like climate disruptions. And the fifth is massive technological inventiveness.
So rather than viewing these as an isolated grocery list of risks, they operate like a chain reaction. The late-stage debt cycle squeezes the middle class, which sparks political populism, which makes a country internally weak, right as a geopolitical rival steps up.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. It is a massive feedback loop. Dalio warns that when all five of these forces start amplifying each other, we experience sweeping global restructuring.
Looking at that restructuring, Dalio seems incredibly bullish on India for the next decade. He actually compares them to China 30 years ago. Why India specifically?
Well, because India is insulated from several of those negative feedback loops right now.
Right, of course.
While other major economies are burdened by late-stage debt cycles and aging populations, India has relatively low debt burdens and this massive young demographic dividend.
Which means they're spending heavily on internal infrastructure rather than just servicing old debt.
Exactly, which naturally attracts foreign capital fleeing geopolitical tensions elsewhere. They're at the beginning of their growth cycle.
While the West is at the tail end of a debt cycle. But here's the crazy thing. Despite spotting all these massive macroeconomic trends, When Dalio was asked what a young person with just $100 should invest in, he completely pivoted.
Yeah, no stocks, no gold, no emerging markets.
Wait, really? Just education?
Yeah, he advised investing that $100 entirely in their own education. Because your own capability is the one asset that isn't a liability on a government balance sheet. It can't be inflated away or seized in a geopolitical conflict.
It is the ultimate independent asset. So for you listening, as you navigate these massive macro shifts, keeping an eye on liquidity and those five interacting forces is crucial. But your own human capital might be the safest harbor there is.
But that brings up an interesting angle that Dalio didn't dive into, just something for you to think about. If your personal skills and knowledge are your most inflation-proof asset, what happens when artificial intelligence advances to the point where it can replicate those skills instantly? Is human capital about to face its own unprecedented bubble?